and welcome back to another edition of Finding the Balance with me, Chase. I have some time here to do another one, which is really, really cool. So it allows me to get some of these thoughts while they're fresh on my mind sort of out of the way. Fresh thoughts, but important thoughts, nevertheless. It's always important to... You don't want to be just flying off the cuff completely. So you have to forgive me. I have not taken any of my sinus medication, so my sinuses may kind of get a little stuffy here throughout the program. I guess it just depends on how long I do this before I'm able to go take some sinus medication, but it's what I deal with. So I may have some strange, awkward breathing here and there. I will try not to do that. But yes, excuse me, have some time here to just do another Finding the Balance, and we're going to dive into, again, continue with our thing on the Screwtape letters, which I have sitting right here on my iPad. But before I do that, I want to take some time here to talk about something that I've been seeing a lot of lately. Let me first just provide a little context for why I want to talk about this. And if I were to title this talk that I'm about to do, I would probably title it something like The Dangers of Apologetics, or The Problem with Apologetics. It's a little bit of a, kind of a bait and switch, I guess. A way to kind of just make you go, he has a problem with apologetics, or there's something wrong with apologetics? It's just kind of, I guess, a provocative way to title it, I guess. But anyways, little play on words. But yes, there is a danger in apologetics. There is one, and I can only say for myself that I am blessed that the Lord guided my steps every place I went, even through all the mistakes I've made and continue to make, that I didn't fly off into bad places. I saw... earlier this week, sometime, I think it was on Monday, either Monday or maybe even Sunday, to be honest, I saw a post in this group I'm following, Christian Theology Corner. And like I said in my last program, which is on KJV onlyism and TR onlyism, that's the unique title of that one. Otherwise, just doing more Screwtape letters. But I said on that program that I've seen some posts in this group. Now this is one of the other posts that I saw, and this was a young lady. I forgot her name, but young lady. I'm always good with faces, so I always remember the face and the avatar rather than the name. That's the way I am. Apparently, that's the way a lot of people are. I've been meeting a lot of people who always tell me the same thing. I tell them that I'm good with faces, I'm bad with names. So to me, I'm just like, wow, that's weird. I thought I was one of those rare ones who I'm a visual person, so, it's, especially with numbers, and if you're trying to give me directions somewhere, if you just tell me rather than write it on a map or something like that, you're going to lose me really fast. You go down this street and then go down that street and then you take a left and then I'm like, whoa, hold on. I don't get it. If you can give me some imagery of what I should be looking for, what building should be on the left or on the right, and which one should be on the left, what color are they, those kinds of things like that. That'll help me a lot. But if you tell me just plain old straight up street names and stuff like that, I'll get lost. Anyways, she said that she was saved 11 months ago, which is great, awesome. But that is a new convert. That is a brand new Christian. And she was asking, she wants resources for apologetics. She finds apologetics very interesting, wants to get into apologetics. And I did offer some advice. She wanted to go to, what's the best seminary to go to for apologetic stuff. People are recommending Biola, which I'm like, okay. I guess that's okay. But let me. So that there was that. Okay, I don't want to get too far into that because I want to still provide a little bit more context. And then I saw, this guy, I forgot his last name, Cameron something. I have an idea what his last name is, but I don't know if it's right, so I don't want to just butcher it completely and sound like an idiot. But he's the guy who kind of hosts that Capturing Christianity thing. I don't know what exactly it is. Excuse me. So he's been on this journey to the Tiber River and crossing over. As James White said, he's swimming in the Tiber River. I think he's right in saying that this guy is on the shores now. I mean, he's really just there. I mean, he just hasn't admitted it yet. He's already saying things like, "What's wrong with praying to saints?" and stuff like that, asking for help from the saints. He's already saying these things. I mean, it's gonna happen. It's sad. I'm not saying it's not sad, but it's gonna happen. I don't know who the guy is, to be honest with you. Never really paid much attention to him until now, but apparently I guess he's kind of he's a millennial, and he's got the millennial haircut, sort of nice and slick and on the top, and the sides are kind of really a lot shorter than what's on the top, that kind of haircut thing. I mean, I'm a millennial. I guess I'm the older millennials, and I just don't get it, so I don't care about that stuff. I'm just me. I just do my thing, so but anyways, so he's talking about all this stuff about Roman Catholicism, and then he said that he's before all that he was saying, I'm closer to Roman Catholicism or just Catholicism than I've ever been. I'm not quite there yet, but I'm still. He said something like I'm still far away, but I'm closer than I was, and I'm just, there's nothing stopping you from ending up there at all. I mean, I just don't understand why you just don't throw in the towel already. Just wave the flag and say, "All right, I'm coming over. Here you go. Here I am." But anyways, I was listening to a lot of people talking about him, and again, because I don't know who he is. I've never listened to his stuff and anything like that. But from what I have heard, so obviously this is secondhand knowledge. From what I have heard, listening to James White and a few others, it sounds to me this guy reminds me a lot of my early days, like my childhood. I grew up in a Christian home, so this is where I guess I'm going to get into sort of my testimony a little bit here. Now, I don't really talk about my testimony much unless it's worthwhile, I think, for an important conversation. So here we go. My dad, as long as I can remember, my dad put a lot of emphasis on apologetics. So I grew up in a Christian home, like I said, Christian family and stuff like that. We were, again, when I was a kid, we didn't think much about this, but we were probably something of a fundamentalist Baptist of some sort. But again, see, we didn't think about denominations or anything like that. It was just like, I'm just a Christian. We never thought about any of the world of Christendom at all. There was like Christians, and then there were like Roman Catholics, and my dad always talked about and warned us about Roman Catholicism and things like that. But I never knew why as a kid what the difference was. I didn't care. I honestly didn't care. I was just a kid. I just wanted to be a kid. That was it. So, but I always believed, nevertheless, that the Christian worldview or the Christian faith, even though I didn't see it exactly as I'm describing it, I didn't see it as a worldview or anything like that, but nevertheless, I always believed that the Christian perspective was very important, and it was always in the back of my mind growing up, always, through my depravity and even up to this day, my depravity up to this day. So yeah, we did a lot of church shopping as when I was a kid. Went to several different churches. We didn't always go to the same churches at the same like consistently. There's at least two, I think, or maybe possibly three churches. But I spent my entire childhood never really in a single church. And the churches that we did join were kind of pretty big churches too, the churches that we went to. And again, all of these, when I look back now, if I were to define these churches, they would probably some kind of, well, they were obviously very, big Eva, I guess is what they call it now, kind of stuff like that. It's just very your typical you're very stereotypical kind of shallow evangelical church, just kind of they're more interested, they won't admit this, but they're more interested in just the numbers and getting their church big and things like that, and making Christianity really exciting and stuff like that. Doesn't mean that the pastor wasn't preaching something that was very important to know at all, but for the most part, when I look back, it's very clear to me that these churches were very concerned with that God's glory was sort of secondary to everything else. What was more important was just getting people in and then changing lives, kind of thing like that. But so that was my growing up environment. As I got to my middle school years, we were not going to church as much anymore, but my dad was still emphasizing apologetics, and you're at your middle school years, when you're 14, 15, that's when your mind begins to start to, in a certain sense, mold and shape. Your mind begins to mold and shape. It's not exactly, it's nowhere near as mature as it needs to be, but it's starting there. It's kind of beginning. You start to think more about things. At least in my experience, this is what it was for me. I began to think more about things that most of the kids around me weren't thinking about. I'm not saying this to make myself special or anything like that. Just I was the kind of kid who, again, these were like the early days of the internet too, and listening to the news. I was the kind of kid who would listen to, I guess it's in a sense what they would call precocious, I guess, in a certain sense. Although I was never really outwardly expressive of it. I didn't really just put it out there. But I always, in my head, was asking these questions in my mind. And whenever I heard somebody saying something against the Christianity, I just couldn't get it out of my mind. I felt like I just had to, at least in my mind, find an answer to that. So I grew up with an apologetic-oriented mindset, I guess. It was very important to me as a kid. It became more and more important to me. Again, when I was at school, I pretended like I was just an ordinary kid. But when I wasn't at school, it was a totally different story, But anyways, so going in, as I got into my high school years, it was again, it just develops more and more and more. I decided, yes, I am a Christian. Okay, I was like, okay, I'm definitely a Christian, even though I wasn't behaving like one. I wasn't really doing anything that was really living a holy life at all. I wasn't reading the Bible, anything like that. I never read the Bible. I'm a kid. What kid has time for that kind of stuff? I have more important things to do, like gossip and all that stuff. Homework that I never actually did. But nevertheless, I felt, even though I wasn't really a Christian, I felt like I had a duty to defend the Christian faith and the Christian worldview, because it was a worldview that made sense. It made perfect sense of the world around me. Atheism to me was just always it couldn't work. It never made any sense to me, which of course I still believe to this day. But still, all that jazz and whatnot. You hear all this noise back here, that's the dogs, so don't worry about it. They may start barking here now and every once in a while, but anyways, so not living as a Christian, but I'm still going on YouTube when YouTube started, defending the faith and all this kind of stuff like that, but because I wasn't really changed on the inside of me, my heart wasn't truly changed. It never even though I was engaged in apologetic stuff, I would read, and I would listen to all these. I would listen to William Lane Craig. I would read C.S. Lewis quotes, and stuff like that. And I never actually read any of his books, but I would read quotes from C.S. Lewis, and they were just so provocative, so cool, and just so philosophical and stuff like that. It put into my mind the idea that, and I looked at churches, and by this time, by my high school years, we weren't even going to church anymore. There was just no more church. I had this idea that Christianity would not survive this culture unless it got smarter. And there is truth to that, but you need to understand what I meant at the time. I meant it in the way that William Lane Craig probably means it, where we need to be more engaging. To engage the culture, we need to be more philosophical. We need to be more sophisticated as Christians, and these kinds of things like that, And so that was what I was thinking. And I honestly, when I look back, and I dread the thought to this day, but when I look back, I honestly had the idea that I didn't need to go to church because, church was really for the Christians who just wanted to who needed it so badly, all that stuff. And I never felt the need for it. I felt like, they're over there in the hospital and I'm up here on the front lines doing the real business of the Christian faith, making the Christian faith a serious thing in the world around me. And again, listening to even Ravi Zacharias. I listened to a lot of Ravi Zacharias, and I still love Ravi to this day. Don't get me wrong. Please don't misunderstand me. I believe Ravi is with the Lord. But of course, as I grew in my faith, years later, I was listening to him less and less and less and less. And so, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. I had this idea that I had to be an intellectual. I had to know all these logical ways to argue and things like that. I had to know all of these things and these particular names for these. I had to know all this stuff about science and second law of thermodynamics and things like that. All these kinds of things like that. And then try to philosophize my way around atheists. And that was what I was focused on. I was focused on atheism completely. I was not interested at all in the religious debates and the theological issues. Because I never had any interest whatsoever in any of that kind of stuff. So I was always just researching the cosmological arguments and all of these kinds of stuff, listening to Craig and the moral arguments and everything that, are there absolutes or are there not absolutes, and all this stuff. That's the stuff I was getting into, and that's what I believed was what made me a Christian. That's what I thought. And therefore I didn't need to go to church, and church was for the people who, church in the Bible, reading the Bible constantly is for people who just are sort of simplistic, weak. Honestly, that's the way I was thinking. I didn't admit it, like I said, didn't admit it at the time, but that's how I was thinking. So that's how things began for me. I thought that's what it took, at least for me, to be a Christian. But I was not concerned on any level whatsoever with who God was. I was not concerned whatsoever. We have a child abduction alert, so I'm just making sure I read this properly here. I'm sorry. Okay. Make sure I keep that in mind. But I was not concerned with who God was. I was not concerned with my position in his sight. I wasn't concerned with my sin. I was not concerned with what Christ did for me, why he had to die on the cross. None of that. Nothing whatsoever. I just knew that he died on the cross and he died for sins, but I never made the connection of that to myself. Never crossed my mind at all. For some 24 years of my life, it never once dawned on me. Something like that, 24 or 23. I don't exactly remember when my conversion began, but and it wasn't a switch either. It wasn't just like boom, there you go, I'm saved, and and I can't exactly pinpoint when I was saved. I can only tell you when my journey to salvation began. That's all I can tell you. But anyways, and so that was my starting, I guess, my starting journey, and I think that's a lot of sort of what Dr. James White was talking about in his own episode on this, which he did recently. It's called Swimming in the Tiber River, I think. He did it very recently, earlier this week, and it was a great episode, and I think it's very important for all of us to listen to, especially those of us who are passionate about apologetics. Because as I dwell on this subject more and more and more, this is what the danger of apologetics is. I now when I look back, I know that I know that I don't want to be the guy who I used to be, but I didn't exactly know how to pinpoint where things went wrong. And I think that this right now, what I just described to you is where it was, is that I think there's a lot of younger people who are diving into apologetics before they ever contemplate who they are before a holy and righteous God. That does not. They can sit there and they can say, they'll sit there and they'll say, yeah, I'm a sinner like everybody else, and they just repeat this, they'll just parrot it, but it won't really ring true in their hearts. Do you know? Have you ever cried over your sinfulness and cried out to the Lord to save you from it? Have you ever done that? I think if you haven't, that's a serious problem at the very least, and at best and most likely you've never truly experienced the saving grace of God, and you're still lost. You can do all these apologetics, you can come up with all these brilliant arguments, you can do all these cosmological, ontological arguments, and blah 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 blah, and still be completely lost, stand before God on judgment day, and perish. How I think that's the problem with a lot, because James White mentioned in his program, he thinks, and I believe him. I honestly believe him because of my own case, that this Cameron guy probably has read more on the Kalam cosmological argument than he has on the imputed righteousness of Christ. And I think that's true because, as Jesus himself says, where your heart is, where your treasure is, there your heart will also be, something like that. Your heart is also. And of course, what that means is obviously in the context he's talking about, to lay your treasures in heaven, not here on the earth, And then if your treasures are truly heavenly, everything you do on the earth will be for that, and it won't be for something here on earth. What's everything here on earth have in common? It's perishing. It's all fading away. Everything fades away. So if you put your trust in things that fade away, then that's a faith that will eventually die and it will not last. But putting that in application, if your treasure is truly on the gospel of Jesus Christ, it would seem to me, naturally, you'd want to read more about what Jesus did for you on that cross, on that tree. Wouldn't it? And so, if you're not consuming stuff on what Christ did for you on that tree, my hair. If you're not consuming what Christ, all this knowledge and reading your scriptures, most importantly, about what Christ did for you on that tree, doesn't that demonstrate that you don't really care about that? And if you don't really care about that, doesn't that ultimately demonstrate you're not really a Christian? You've never experienced the saving grace of God. You've never wept over your sin. You've never wept about thinking about the grace of God. You've never cried and just cried and contemplated the horror that he has suffered for an undeserving speck of dust like you. Because let me tell you this is what happened to me. So my conscience is pricked by the Holy Spirit, by a pastor who's no longer my pastor, but still love the man like as if he was my grandpa. But I haven't seen him since this whole COVID thing started, because he's old, and he just needs to be careful right now. But anyways, but my conscience was pricked by listening to him speak very seriously to me and a couple other guys. And ever since then, everything flipped for me. My greatest concern was I needed to know that I was right before God, that I stood righteous before God. And I didn't, again, at the time, I didn't really know that that's what I was doing. But as I look back, I realized my sudden desire to go to church, my sudden desire to be part of the brethren, was fueled by that need to know that I was saved. And I went through quite a roller coaster of anguish. And even up to this day, sometimes, it's an up and down kind of thing like that, But when that happened, all of the apologetics, all the stuff that I was doing in apologetic things, it just went away. I didn't care about any of it. I didn't even think about it. It never crossed my mind for a moment. And I did begin to read C.S. Lewis, but I wasn't reading C.S. Lewis so I can come up with more cool arguments against atheists. I wanted to, because I was philosophical in my thinking, I was naturally attracted to Christians who were philosophical, and that C.S. Lewis was like it. So was Ravi Zacharias. And so that's all I cared about. I wanted to know what God said in his word. I didn't care about what I thought. I just needed to know what was true. That's all I cared about. And that's for about maybe a year and a half. Even the news, I threw out overall. I didn't care about any of that stuff. All I cared about was what is the gospel, and am I on the right side of the gospel? That's all I cared about. And so that's where I eventually found R.C. Sproul. I eventually found Paul Washer. I found James White. I found James White mostly because I was looking for apologetics against Roman Catholicism, because I had a Roman Catholic friend who was beating me up with all this stuff about Roman Catholicism. I think he had just become a Roman Catholic, and he was sort of in that cage stage, Roman Catholicism. He very quickly went from a friend of mine to a inquisitor to me. And I didn't have any answers for him. And so I went looking for answers, and that's where I found James White. And I've been listening to him ever since. But, and I was listening to R.C. Sproul, and apologetics sort of started coming back into my mind. But again, it was definitely at best a secondary issue to me. All I wanted to know was, what is this Christian faith that I have become a part of? What is it? I want to know what it is. I don't care about my good feelings and my feel goods, the positive vibes. I don't care about any of that. I want to know what God hath said. That's what I wanted to know. R.C. Sproul was a great source of that. And yeah, R.C. Sproul is one of the reasons why I'm reformed today. You can blame him for that. But but listening to R.C. Sproul, man, it opened my world up. I mean, it was just a whole new world of learning. I had no idea any of this stuff was out there. It just never, I just didn't, it was just crazy. It was just amazing to think about all that stuff. So, yeah, and eventually, I came around to where I started paying attention to the news again, and to all the craziness going on out there. But it wasn't really so much atheism anymore. Atheism, yeah, definitely, but not as much as it used to be. I used to think this was just a battle between mere Christianity and atheism. That's what I thought. And now I've come to realize, because again, R.C. Sproul, guys like him have opened me up to a whole world of theological differences, and just Roman Catholicism, Eastern Orthodoxy, Mormonism, independent fundamentalist Baptists, like I was talking about last week, KJVO onlyism and TR onlyism, and all these other things and stuff like that. Even within the Christian world, Calvinism versus Arminianism, all these things. In eschatology, you have futurism versus preterism, these kinds of things like that. All this stuff, just Islam, and then there's Eastern religions a little bit, but I haven't really looked too much into that kind of stuff. But still, all these kinds of things, in baptism, infant baptism versus credo baptism, all this stuff. It was all, suddenly I was made aware of all this stuff and how important this stuff was. My focus, in other words, if I can just sort of sum it all up, my focus shifted to a genuine concern for the health of the Church of Christ, not the cult that's called the Church of Christ. I mean the actual Church of Jesus Christ, the church that exists all over the world. His body, that's been my concern. That's become my concern, my primary concern. The health of the body and the health of God's people. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is, if you start your apologetics with, I'm trying to be fair because I don't want to misrepresent. Most people, a lot of people, not most, but a lot of people dive into apologetics, and their mindset is, and I'm afraid it's like this girl I was just mentioning to you, just got saved 11 months ago. 11 months. I would tell any new convert, hey, I really don't want to see you getting into apologetic issues. I want to see you just, again, like I said, what I was saying, that happened for me. I just want to know who God is. I want to know who Jesus is. I want to know what he's done for me. That's all I care about. Because when that happened to me, when I began to grow in that, when that was my foundation, what is the gospel? I was rooted more in the gospel, and I learned about the Reformation and the five solas, and that rooted me further and deeper into that, and what are the five solas, and then arguing how we know about the five solas, how we argue for the five solas, these kinds of things like that, and that was how I was rooted. And so when the Christian faith, when I saw it being attacked, now I could respond to it from the Christian worldview perspective, not from some bare philosophical point out there in no man's land or whatever. I was responding to the criticisms based on a Christian worldview, because that was my foundation. That's where I was coming from, and it was amazing. It was like I was spotting all this stuff, and most of the times when I was responding to criticisms, I was like, that's not what Christianity is. Like, that's wrong. That's not what the Bible says. That's not how I used to respond to those. I used to see, like atheists would bring up to me about things like where God does this in the Old Testament, he does that in the Old Testament, look at all these evil things, and I didn't know what to do to any of those things. I was like, oh man, the only thing I could think of was like, get it out of the text as fast as I possibly can and get it back onto the atheist. Well, how do you know what's right and what's wrong? That's how I would respond to those kinds of things, because I didn't want to talk about the text. I was embarrassed about the Word of God, and the reason why I was embarrassed because I didn't know anything about it. I in my heart of hearts, I didn't care about it. I just didn't care. I had no interest in. I was defending something I knew nothing about. But now, whenever I see the criticisms of the Bible, I'm I always tell people like I love getting into the text. I mean, let's go there. You want to talk about the Bible? Let's get right in there. I love talking about it because it's a win-win for me because I know the Bible a whole lot more now. I know that God is God and we are not. He can do whatever He wants with His creation, and then at the same time, I'm exposing this guy to the Word of God, and so he has no choice but to be exposed to the holiness of God. And so it's a win-win for me. We're just talking about the Bible constantly. I mean, I love getting into the Bible. Whenever I'm not in the Bible, I'm uncomfortable. I'm like, I don't know where I'm going. This is concerning to me. I want to be in the Word where I'm at home there. That's where I belong, So, my nose is getting stuffy. I'm having to breathe out of my mouth now, and I'm talking out of my mouth at the same time, which means I'm taking deeper breaths, and my throat's getting a little bit more scratchy, but we're going to manage. So, anyways, getting back to the point here. So, my concern for this young woman was that she was diving into something before she was grounded in her faith. That's my problem with apologetics today, with the William Lane Craigs of the world. And all due respect to William Lane Craig, he's a smarter man than me. Okay, the problem with a lot of this movement, and with things like Biola, going to Biola and stuff like that, Biola's not teaching you to be a better Christian. It's just teaching you how to be a clever philosopher. Sorry, that's what it is. If you start with the need to do apologetics, your theology will constantly, the philosophy then as a result comes first. Your theology will constantly be subject to the philosophy, because you've started with the premise that apologetics is very important. And why is it important? Well, because people are saying all these things. And so, see, you notice your entire reason for, again, you may not admit this, but I would just ask you to think about this. That means your entire reason for your Christian get up, I guess, as you got going, is to make the Christian worldview something worthwhile in this world, or because it's your starting point. In other words, the approval of others becomes the central focus. It just does. It's starting from us and working our way outwards, which is totally backwards. If you start with apologetics is important, your Christian faith will be a hostage to whatever philosophical necessity is required at the moment. That's why you see the Frank Turek's and the William Lane Craig's just kind of struggle a lot, to address direct questions to the scriptures and all this other stuff. So now if you flip that though, like what I was just telling you about my journey, when that flips and your concern is the gospel itself as it is revealed by God's own word, if that is your first and primary concern, that gives then a reason to do apologetics. And so now that you're rooted in the gospel itself, from there you do apologetics. And so all your apologetic methodology comes straight directly from a Christian worldview. But when you turn that all around, you are going to be constantly concerned with how the person you're talking to is thinking about what you're saying. And so you will inevitably, you may not want to do this, but it's going to become like second nature. You're just going to want, I've felt the tug constantly in evangelistic situations. It's like where I wanted to just that's going to be too much for him. He's just going to be, it's not going to work. The whole Trinity thing. And what if I can just kind of simplify? Those temptations constantly hit at me, but I can't do that. I have to proclaim to this person the truth. I have to. Well, based on the scripture. Scripture does not give me this pragmatic approach to apologetics at all. This is the truth. You expose them to the truth. Let God handle the rest. But the other thing that is also important is that with apologetics, if your concern is the gospel itself, so if that is your concern, then when you do apologetics, it's because you want to get the gospel to this person. That is, you see what I'm trying to say, folks? When the gospel is the focus, that corrects everything. That gives you the motives to do everything else. It's apologetics becomes a means to the gospel. It never becomes this thing sitting over by itself. It's not like the queen to the gospel or anything like that. It is a gateway. It is a way. Apologetics are tools to get to the main issue, the thing that's most important. And I think that's another one of the reasons why so many of the world's most famous Christian apologists, who are really just world-class philosophers who happen to be Christian, you never really see them preach about what Christ did for sinners. Ravi Zacharias is a bit of an exception. I'll give you that. But the reason is because I hate to say it. I don't enjoy saying it, but the reason is I can only think of is that their first and primary concern is making Christianity something appealing to this postmodern world. But it just won't be. Christianity is an ancient religious faith. It does not conform to cultures and philosophical movements. It is what it is. It doesn't care about all that other stuff. And I don't know about you, but I don't find comfort in constantly changing cultures. I want something that never changes, and the gospel never changes. It's rooted and founded in the truth itself. Withstands all the storms, all the raging rivers, and all that stuff. That's, I think, one of the main issues with guys like Cameron and my concern with this young lady, and others like them. I mean, how many more of them are there? These are just two, but how many more of them are there that begin with the importance of apologetics rather than beginning with the importance of what the gospel is? That has to be. What does Paul say? Paul says that he has determined to know nothing but Christ and Him crucified. I mean, look at all the world-class apologists today. Is that the William Lane Craigs of the world today? I'm sorry I'm picking on William Lane Craig, but is that their focus? Is that the only thing they want people to know about? Christ and Him crucified? Oh, yes. I talk about Jesus being crucified, Yeah, but the historical reliability of the crucifixion, yeah, sure. But what does it mean? That's what Paul was talking about. If Paul had to get into the issues of proving the historicity and the historical fact of the crucifixion, sure, he would do it. But see, he's not stopping there. Most of these guys just stop right there. He's using those things to get to the main issue. The thing that matters the most. And if you just stop short of getting to the thing that matters the most, there's no point in doing the rest. There's no point in wasting somebody's time with all these philosophical arguments. There's none. And so it comes back around to, again, where you need to ask yourself, and I think this is why Cameron is converting to Roman Catholicism. Have you ever wept over your contemplation of the gospel, over thinking about what, here you are, a vile, wretched sinner. You've done nothing that would make God want to even look upon you. I mean, just a disgusting, filthy little creature. Sinning and sinning. Paul says in Romans, their throats are an open grave. Who's there? Everybody outside of Christ. Everybody in their natural born state as sinners. Your throat is an open grave. Have you ever really sat and thought about that? I mean, that's one of the most horrific insults somebody could ever say to you. He just said you speak death. Your throat is an open grave. What's in an open grave? A rotting corpse, just death, stench, and bugs and everything. Just everything that's disgusting. Every disgusting thing you could possibly think of is there in an open grave. And that's in your throat. That's your mouth. You're breathing out just death constantly. All the days of your life. Their throats are an open grave. That's what Paul says. Have you ever really thought about that? Have you ever really contemplated that? I mean, that's pretty mean. So, thinking about that and grasping hold of your depravity, have you then thought, and yet, he chose to save me? Like, what? Why? Why would he do something like that? And just thinking about that and letting that just ring in your mind and just falling down and crying that here I am, just this wretch. Woe is me. I'm a man of unclean lips. I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. There was nothing about you or me worth saving. And Paul says that in Romans 2. They become worthless. They're all worthless. There was nothing in them worth saving. There's nothing in us worth saving. Why would God do it? It has nothing to do with us. It has everything to do with who he is, his mercy. And when you really think about that, when you really put that in perspective, and then you think about what Jesus did to make that possible, the suffering he went through, coming down at all, in this world, and he's the Son of God. He doesn't need to suffer the effects of of this world. Comes and does it anyway. He has no obligation whatsoever, and he does it. I mean, what drives somebody to do something like that? That surely can only be of divine origin. And so, thinking about that, just crying about that. Has it ever happened to you before? Have you ever thought about that? And I say to you, if that's never entered your mind, that has to happen before you ever think about apologetics. Because when you're not concerned with whether or not you are a sinner saved by the grace of God alone, by the work of Christ alone, when you're not concerned with that, whether you're joining a church, don't matter. You're consistently a part of a church, doesn't matter. And you'll probably sit in a church, if you do go to church, and listen to the sermon and think, these guys, why do I need this? I mean, this is the shallow stuff. The theology is the shallow stuff, where the real rubber meets the road, where the meat really is out there in the field, debating the philosophical issues and things like that. I used to think that way. I really did. I used to think that way. And thank God in his mercy, he flipped me around completely. But that needs to be your concern. It needs to be your number one concern. All right, so I spent way too much time on that. In letter number 3 of the Screwtape letters, it's very interesting. It's actually this is definitely gets really interesting here. So, in letter number 2 was about how, again, the patient has become a Christian, and now he's going to church for the first time. And what Screwtape wants Wormwood to do is to distort his expectations, to make him basically set his standards to an unrealistic point, to where he needs to see the people as that they need to be these perfectly holy people, and all this kinds of stuff like that. And then when he doesn't see them, this religion's fake, all this kind of stuff like that. And he sees all this hypocrisy around him, and then blah, blah, blah. And then the church building itself is kind of a little bit run down. Well, that would somehow prove that this Christian religion is just sort of mediocre and childish fantasy stuff. And that's kind of, it's a way to confuse the patient. And especially if he's a brand new Christian, yeah, it could probably work in confusing him. That's kind of like what letter number 2 was about. And letter number 3, it moves to the patient and it focuses a lot on his relationship to his mother. And it actually begins, "My dear Wormwood, I am very pleased by what you tell me about this man's relation with his mother. But you must press your advantage. The enemy will be working from the center outwards, gradually bringing more and more of the patient's conduct under the new standard, and may reach his behavior to the old lady at any moment. You want to get in first. Keep in close touch with our colleague Glubos, who is in charge of the mother, and build up between you in that house a good settled habit of mutual annoyance, daily pinpricks." So he begins to offer these tips on how to do this, how to set up and sort of agitate this annoyance between the patient and his mother. And the first step is basically to keep the patient focused on this super inner conversion thing like that. Like he's just been altered in just a inexplicable kind of way. And let that kind of make him think that he is he's like a Superman now, sort of. It's kind of like what's being said is, so it's a way to keep the patient focused on. And I kind of remember this in my early Christian walk as well, where I became focused on a lot of the big things that Christians needed to grow into, kind of thing like that, and I neglected. In some ways, even to this day, I still do when I think about it. I neglected many of the smaller things, the more important things. It's kind of like if you go to a church and you join a church, and then, hey pastor, what can I do to help? And you're asking that with a humble attitude, but what you're really hiding behind that is the assumption, hey, can I teach a class? Can I do this? And then what if the pastor goes, well, we need someone to help pick up chairs. And then all of a sudden, what? That how is that being a Christian? That's a tiny, pathetic little thing, I've heard a lot of stories about Christians who did the chair picking up thing, didn't like it at first, but when they look back years later, glad they did something like that, because they learned a lot from that. It's like Jesus' words, he who has, I forgot the words exactly, but he who has been trusted with, or who has been faithful with a little, will be given much, or something like that. I think you know what I'm talking about. I'm paraphrasing a lot, but it's the willingness to be humble and to recognize, and that honestly, also when you think about it, a lot of those little things are much bigger than they appear, and so to keep the patient from being able to allow the patient to practice self-reflection, but not to be able at all to recognize the important things, which are a lot of times are the little things that are easy to pass up. The little bits of the way he is as a human being, just from just not even putting your dishes away when you're done, those kinds of things like that, or just taking the trash out, taking a few minutes to take the trash out, things like that. Not focused on those things, but rather be focused on how much of a super Christian he's becoming, kind of like that. I know this thing. I can't go, kind of what we were just talking about, all this stuff I know, and I can discern all these things like that, and whether my reputation in the church itself, and blah blah blah. So it says, keep his mind off the most elementary duties by directing it to the most advanced and spiritual ones. Aggravate that most useful human characteristic, the horror and neglect of the obvious. You must bring him to a condition in which he can practice self-examination for an hour without discovering any of those facts about himself which are perfectly clear to anyone who has ever lived in the same house with him or worked in the same office. Now, the second tip that he gives to Wormwood here is that the patient's going to pray for his mom, to pray that she be a better person and things like that, to pray for her salvation, things like that. Those are good things to pray for. But what Wormwood is to do is to put in the patient's mind subtly this pictorial view of his mom, who's this holy woman, could do no wrong, just an absolute blessing, and just all this stuff like that, to the point where such an idea is so unrealistic and just, it's like, the Holy Virgin is morphed. She's morphed into the Holy Virgin almost. Kind of like that, the superhero mom. And with his expectations so high, and of course not actually being met, he becomes more and more frustrated with the mom, the real mom that he has to deal with, the real mom who is still a sinner, has many flaws and mistakes that she makes and stuff like that. And it makes him less and less and less tolerant of the real mother, because I'm praying for her. Why isn't she being more like this? Why isn't she being more like that? And he just gets more and more frustrated with her and things like that. And the relationship will then therefore become even worse, And that's something that we really need to be careful about. And this, again, is one of the reasons why we're doing this, is to bring to our attention whether we're falling for some of these traps where I pray for somebody to be a better person, but my desires for them to be that better person slowly become, they become the means by which I just judge this person, and that, since they're not becoming what my mind pictures them as, and that I'm praying for this kind of person, you're projecting onto them what they ought to be and that they're not. And when you don't see your prayers beginning to, it's almost like you're relying on your own prayers to change the person. And when that's failing, you become flustered and just angry and all these kinds of things like that. And it's something to be very, very careful for. So he goes, two advantages follow. In the first place, his attention will be kept on what he regards as her sins, by which, with a little guidance from you, he can be induced to mean any of her actions which are inconvenient or irritating to himself. So he can, with a little twist in the mind, Wormwood could make the patient see what are just sort of inconvenience to the patient about his mother as actual sins. So, my mom, Lord, please, make my mom a better person because she, poured too much salt on my dinner last night. She's just being really, really lazy and and things like that, and not making my dinner properly. And so, Lord, please make her better, and all this other stuff. And I mean, you can come up with all kinds of different things. But see, those are little inconveniences and things like that. Those are things that just, my mom did not pour me a glass of this and that for breakfast, and so, Lord, please make her a better person to actually remember to do that for me. I have long days at work or whatever, those kinds of things that, where you could easily just get up and just pour your own stinking glass of milk, and then she sees you pouring a glass of milk. Oh, I'm so sorry, honey, I forgot about it. No, it's okay, Mom. No big deal. I got it. It's fine. I'm a big boy. I can pour my own glass of milk. So those kinds of things like that, to make what are actual just inconveniences sins. And again, this perpetuates this idea that what ends up happening is you develop, and you don't even see it because it's so subtle. If Wormwood were to do it correctly, it's so subtle that he wouldn't realize that he is developing his own idea of righteousness. He's allowing his own self-righteous ideas of what holiness looks like, to be the focus of his prayer. And then when he's not seeing those things coming true, he gets more and more angry and destroys the kind of grace that he's supposed to be having towards her as a Christian. So now the third one is to go back to the sort of daily annoyances, things like that. Have the two of them. The idea is to make the two. Oh my gosh, Romer! To make the two of them be annoyed with each other, but in a very passive aggressive way, and to just demand to have double standards, in other words, towards each other. So the idea is that the patient is supposed to say things with the intent to insult her, but not in a very obvious way, so that when she is offended, he goes, I just said this. That's all I said. I wasn't being mean or anything like that. And yet she gets all offended. Right, Rumor? Yes. Careful, honeys. And so it's this way you put the strife in between the two of them. Rumor is being just a pest right now. Goodness, Rumor, what? Huh? Do you want to say hi to people? Huh? Do you? Oh my goodness! Come on, guys. Number 3. When two humans have lived together for many years, it usually happens that each has tones of voice and expressions of face which are almost unendurably irritating to the other. Work on that. Bring fully into the consciousness of your patient that particular lift of his mother's eyebrows which he learns to dislike in the nursery, and let him think how much he dislikes it. Let him assume that she knows how annoying it is and does it to annoy. If you do your job well, he will not notice the immense improbability of the assumption. And, of course, never let him suspect that he has tones and looks which similarly annoy her. As he cannot see or hear himself, this is easily managed. So, moving down here a little bit here. So and then number 4, I think it's the final point. In civilized life, domestic hatred usually expresses itself by saying things which would appear quite harmless on paper. The words are not offensive, but in such a voice or at such a moment, they are not far short of a blow in the face. To keep this game up, you and Glubos must see to it that each of these two fools has a sort of double standard. Your patient must demand that all his own utterances are to be taken at their face value and judged simply on the actual words, while at the same time judging all his mother's utterances with the fullest and most oversensitive interpretation of the tone and the context and the suspected intention. She must be encouraged to do the same. Hence, from every quarrel they can both go away convinced, or very nearly convinced, that they are quite innocent. You know the kind of thing. I simply ask her what time dinner will be, and she flies into a temper. Once this habit is well established, you have the delightful situation of a human saying things with the express purpose of offending, and yet having a grievance when offense is taken. So that's kind of the gist of letter number 3, how to make the patient and his mother's relationship more and more just negative, and that eats away at their own conscience and their own soul. So the takeaway for us is to really think about, when we pray for somebody, are we sure that we're praying for righteousness as it is defined by Scripture, that they truly grow in the holiness of Christ and the knowledge of Christ and the holiness of God under the sanctification of the Spirit, these kinds of things like that. Or are we praying that they just be more tolerable to ourselves? Is that the focus of our prayers? And then secondly, when we are behaving with other people, passive aggressiveness is not a healthy activity. And we're going to talk about this later on in later letters about cynicism. But it's worth mentioning right now, cynicism can be funny and sometimes useful, but it can also be negative. And we always got to be careful with that. We always have to be careful that we are, seriously asking ourselves if is something I said and the way I said it, was it really a good thing to say? And if we are about to say something in such a way that may not help a situation, because again, you can do what is the scenario here is. You can say something that is in most cases not really an offensive thing to say. It's not a direct insult, but you say it in such a way, in such a context where it's very clear what you meant. It's not. It is in any other situation not a harmful thing. What time is dinner? Kinds of things like that. But you can ask it in such a way as being with attitude and annoyance, and in a way that's meant, you intended to do harm to this person with your words, and say it that way, even though the question itself, what time is dinner, is not really a harmful question. But if you say it in such a way that's hurtful, intended to snark at somebody, make their day worse because you don't like them right now for whatever reason, and then they get offended by it, and then you just go, I just asked what time dinner was. That was it. That's not good. Because not only have you done something wrong, because God doesn't look at the things that you say so much as he looks at what's in your heart, what motivates your heart to say the things that you say. But see, when you're just kind of focused on the outside, as the patient is being encouraged to do in this letter, when you're focused on the outside and not what's internal, you're going to have all these kinds of problems, and you're not even going to know when you won't even realize when you've sinned and hurt somebody, and so it only makes matters worse. So always want to be careful about that, about our attitudes towards others, what we're praying about for them, always keeping those things in mind, folks, as we close this one out. I hope this, like all the other ones, I hope this is useful to you guys, and just kind of dwell on some of these things for a while. See you next time. Solo Deo Gloria, guys. God bless.